In life, a little rain must fall, obviously. Sorry, for some reason, the start button was not working, although I was connected. I thank you for joining me. And let's get started at 12:19. um, all right, so to dispense all of the pleasantries, hello, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for coming in as a pinch hitter in the last minute to start this. Just a couple of things to let you know before I get moving, one of which is welcome insiders. Obviously, our insiders are here. $10 a month. You can be one of them if you'd like to be. Join us if you want a month free. The link is there. Also, I always like to put a treat. There is a link to a series of O. Henry stories, which one of which we will be talking about when we get to Madison Square Garden the second. Okay, I think that's all my pre-flight that we need to do today. Hopefully you will not lose me, although, again, my connection is fine. My start button was not working. Let's go. Let's get in it. And again, sorry for the delay. By the way, I am, once Michelle leaves after a couple minutes, again, I'm chief cook in bottle washing. So please, if you have questions from me, put them in the question tab. That will make life much easier. And here we go. All right. So we are dealing with the lost Madison Square Gardens, plus we'll talk about the current Madison Square Garden a little bit, more so the future of Madison Square Garden. Morbo, I'm glad you're here. There's going to be two direct allusions for you in this presentation. And unfortunately, because of the delay of the technical issue, we'll probably be running late, but if you've got to go, don't worry. There will be a replay that's sent to your inbox. And for insiders, this will be available in the digital archives. All right. So as you are seeing here, this is a shot of the New York and Harlem Railroad, which was a horse-drawn railroad from the very beginning of its life. I love this picture, and this is very foundational in Madison Square Garden, which we'll talk about in just a few. So just in case you do not know where we're talking about, we are talking about Madison Square Park at the moment. As you can see, for those of you who have never been, Madison Square Park is bounded between 23rd and 26th Streets, between 5th Avenue and Madison Avenue. And you'll see Broadway makes a cut right on the corner so that it is not an exact perfect square. But as those of you may know very well, I love to trace the history, the starts of things, including why we have certain names. I love this aerial shot of Madison Square Park. And the area that we will be talking about down here is, of course, where the New York Life building is today. That's where the first two Madison Square Gardens were. And why is it called Madison Square Park? Why was it called Madison Square Garden? And I love this story because it is this house right here that starts everything. Now, this house has a very interesting history leading all the way back to the Dutch occupation of Lower Manhattan. This land was given to a freed slave who built a farmhouse, which would become this house that was passed down through generations, eventually in the early 1800s to a man known as William Corporal Thompson. And William Corporal Thompson renamed the cottage, or the house, Madison Cottage, after his favorite president, James Madison. And he turns his home into a roadhouse. Basically, this was a stop on the way to and from New York, which was still concentrated in Lower Manhattan. So this was considered frontier country. It was a very popular stop. Think of it almost like the Vince Lombardi rest station on the Turnpike. It's sort of the last stop before you hit New York and the first stop as you're coming out of New York on your way to points north. And this will go ahead to set the tenor for all of the naming of this area. It's the reason why we have Madison Avenue. It's the reason why we have Madison Square Park. And it's the reason why we have Madison Square Garden. This house will be torn down in 1852. Now, in between there, 1847, Madison Square Park, much like Washington Square Park and a lot of the other square parks, is incorporated 1847 after being a parade ground for the military, and before that, of course, being a potter's field. That's a story that happens in very, very many of our lower to upper Manhattan parks. The house is torn down in 1852, and it is replaced with this structure, which, if you joined me for the first Lost installment, Crystal Palace, I talked about this as one of the attractions to see before you hit the Crystal Palace. It was Franconi's Hippodrome. And Franconi's Hippodrome, this was on 23rd, so it was on the south side of the park. But it sets the tenor for what will become Madison Square Park in a couple of years, 2 decades, basically. Large, almost Roman sort of Circus Maximus type arena, which was covered with a cloth tent. And as you can see, very seasonal. Worked well in the spring, worked well kind of in the fall. Extreme heat and extreme cold, not so much. Now, Franconi's Hippodrome was started by a consortium of actors, much like, think Globe Theater, Shakespeare. But it was a huge money loser. They'd have chariot races, they'd bring camels and elephants, sort of like the beginnings of the circus started here. But yeah, it didn't really work out too well. And it will be destroyed to make way for the Fifth Avenue Hotel. So Madison Square Park, in the meantime, through the 1850s and 60s, and for those of you, again, who joined me for the Lost New York Mansions, Fifth Avenue Mansion series, will know that the richer upper sets of Manhattan are moving north. And Madison Square Park, they love a park. It starts with Washington Square, goes up to Union Square, and then eventually will move up to here, Madison Square Park. And this becomes a very, very fashionable neighborhood very quickly. So, of course, they want to move the nexus of entertainment and, of course, public transportation here. This is an old slide of the Worth Monument, which was dedicated to General Worth of the Civil War. And Madison Square Park, in the early part of its life, was known most famously as the home of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, where it sat for months and months as a means to raise money for the completion of the statue, which a lot of people know was not easy to do. But that's a whole other talk. And then, of course, Madison Square Park, as later in the 1880s and 1890s, really becomes known as sort of the front yard of Madison Square Garden. Now, this is the second Madison Square Garden. We are going to go systematically through each one of them. Don't worry. But why do we have a Madison Square Garden? Well, it starts with this little plot of land between 26th and 27th Street, between Madison and Park Avenue. And at first, it becomes the home of a major depot for the New York and Harlem Railroad, which links back to that photo I showed you right at the beginning. Again, where that arrow is, right where the New York Life building is today. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few. And this was an early etching or sketch of the New York and Harlem. They called these, they had a bunch of names. This was definitely a depot, and this was a larger depot than most. It was one of the biggest in the city when it opened, but they also like to call these train barns or trolley barns, but this was sort of the mother of all trolley barns. And as you can see, again, the New York and Harlem, which was chartered in the late 1830s, was New York's and one of America's first railroad lines. It really is one of the seminal lines, run by horsepower until the 1850s, when it is replaced with steam. And steam is going to be a problem in this area, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you could see there's sort of a Castelline structure on the top left corner. That was sort of where all the train operations went. And then you'll see there's a long, in the sort of middle of the screen, you have a long, more ornate building with 2 towers and a gable. That's where you would go in, buy your tickets, and wait. They will quickly, the New York and Harlem, basically founded to bring you up to Harlem from New York, a suburban line, will very quickly move up through Westchester County, still not the Bronx yet, all the way up to Albany. This is an 1847 map of New York. You guys know how I love my 1840s, 50s, 60s maps of New York, or by any maps of New York. You can see here on a blow up of this map, it's the only railroad in New York. Again, if you joined us for the Crystal Palace talk, which if you did not, they are in the archives. If you are an insider, you can catch that talk. It's the only railroad in New York. The rest of New York is serviced by omnibuses and stagecoaches, all horse-drawn at the time. But the New York and Harlem starts at City Hall Park. This depot, as you can see, the top arrow, was planned later on and will not be built until the 1850s. And there you can see Madison Square Park right above it. So it moves a little bit further south, and the name New York Harlem Railroad. And there is a shot of the Broadway and 4th Avenue, which would have run right by Madison Square Park. Of course, obviously, because Broadway and 4th Avenue pretty much intersect at this point. And this would have been right before or right after this guy pulled in or pulled out of the depot on 26th Street. I'm going to say pulled out because it looks like it's going south, but that's just my guess. And there is that Castelline structure that I was talking about in between the yards. If you look very closely at the sign, you'll see it says New York, Harlem, and Albany. So you could get from here to Albany very quickly by the late 1840s into the 1850s. You could go all the way up the Hudson Valley with the New York and Harlem. And this would be your main deposit point. Here's a shot of the New York and Harlem right outside. Let me just mute that, sorry. Right outside of the front entryway where passengers would enter in to get their tickets and wait. As you can see, this is a very cold day in New York. Snow right in front. I love this shot because you can clearly see the Harlem above the car. And I use this shot on the Grand Central Terminal tour in person. I love to sort of show the genesis of that man. So the Vanderbilts come into so many things that I talk about, especially on these Lost New Yorks, because what happens is Cornelius Vanderbilt, who is known for his naval shipping prowess, is going to quickly see that rail is going to be a big moneymaker. And so one of his first acquisitions on the rail lines is the New York and Harlem Railroad. He will eventually add the New Haven. He'll eventually add the Hudson. And of course, for those of you who are New Yorkers and or regional commuters, you know, those lines are still with us today in Grand Central Terminal as part of the Metro North system. I'm just going to check to see. I see a bunch of chats coming in. I just want to make sure that I didn't lose anything. No, I didn't. Good. You're just talking. Okay. Just wanted to check. I'm a little paranoid after today's start. So Vanderbilt, just as he's getting his chops into these trains, he converts a lot of them over to steam. And then the city sort of slaps him with this injunction, basically saying, no steam below 42nd Street. No more, can't do it, mainly because A, steam is very unpredictable. Steam engines were exploding. They were a hazard. Noise pollution, steam pollution, which basically just sort of blurred people's visions. But it was sooty, it was dark, and people were getting hit by these trains charging up 4th Avenue. So it is by the 1870s that Vanderbilt has to move all of his operations up to the grandest of train barns at the time, which was the Grand Central Depot here on 42nd, where he will base all three of his rail acquisitions in that home. Again, Grand Central Terminal, secrets of Grand Central Terminal talk. You could access those in the archives to see more or join me on a tour. But the one remnant of the New York Harlem, which I love to talk about, which was, again, made to bring you back down to Madison Square, was the Murray Hill Tunnel, which we still have today, by the way. So you see, this is right in front of the depot, and this tunnel was built right in front of the Grand Union Hotel, which is obviously no longer there, to bring the horse-drawn trains, now the only way you could get below 42nd Street, up to the depot to get your steam trains. And originally, it was streetcar for a long time, and then converted to vehicular traffic, where we still have it today. There was an art installation that opened the tunnel to pedestrians in 2013 by Raphael Hemmer. It was called Voice Tunnel. And you were able to go in, obviously take pictures. You were able to sit right in the middle of this old Harlem line tunnel. And then using an app, you could record your voice and then hear it being played throughout the tunnel, which was pretty cool. But as you can see, if you look at the walls, this is an old 19th century tunnel, which would bring you down to here. So Madison Square Garden, number one. which existed from 1874 to 1890. So Cornelius Vanderbilt basically abandons the depot down on 26th Street and enter another man who comes into my talks quite a bit, Phineas T. Barnum, P.T. Barnum, master of entertainment, also known by many as a huge huckster, but the showman, the greatest showman on earth. He comes in and he takes this old depot yard and turns it into his great Roman hippodrome. So again, he's sort of trying to capitalize on what the Franconi actors were doing at the Franconi Hippodrome. Same thing, he will tent over the yard, he'll clear the rail out, and he'll use it as an open space. Basically, as you could see here by this rendering, he'll use it to do, again, chariot races, exotic animal marches. The sort of early beginnings of the three-ring circus are all piloted here for Phineas T. Barnum. And this is in basically 1874. He has about a year here. He doesn't make a ton of money, and that's the problem. So as you can see, this is an advertisement for P.T. Barnum's Great Roman Hippodrome, afternoon or evening, but he has a very limited time to make money. Basically, spring, fall, too hot in the summer. Also, there were reports that in the spring it was really damp and dank inside here as well. So even spring wasn't that great for doing this sort of more, outdoor, indoor arena-like showmanship. So he abandons it because it's just not making the type of money that he wants. And the next guy to take it over is a guy, he was a bandmaster. So think, for those of you who may remember sort of Lawrence Welk, he was a very popular moralist bandmaster. He was big on temperance and evangelical meetings, but he was also, like Barnum, a huge showman, and he loved to make money. So he also staged flower shows and beauty contests and balls, all here in what he called Gilmore Gardens, because he's planting trees inside of there and shrubs to make it more of an open air beer garden-y feel. He was, again, most famous for very, very large musical performances. He composed music, I think military marches and so on. Here is a sketch of one of Gilmore's musical performances. You can almost, in the background, see a man with his hands up in a black tux. That would be Gilmore himself. But again, didn't work. But the lasting legacy that Gilmore leaves us, still attached to Madison Square Garden and still something we do every year, is in 1877, he sponsors the first New York bench show, and that will become the Westminster Dog Show. And the very first, 1877, was at Gilmore Gardens, the precursor to the Madison Square Garden that we are going to get. One of the other things that Gilmore sort of lays the precedent for in Madison Square Garden's history is boxing. And in the 1870s, boxing was illegal in New York because it was still naked fists and very dangerous. So he did boxing matches, but he couldn't call them matches and he couldn't sell tickets officially to a match. So he called them exhibitions. And that way, it wasn't technically a boxing match, although there were guys in Gilmore Gardens boxing. Goes that way. Boxing is actually going to come very quickly back into the picture with this gentleman. Again, another Vanderbilt I spoke about in our last Lost New York tour of the mansions, of the Gilded Age mansions of Fifth Avenue. This is William K. Vanderbilt, the son of the Commodore, who we just saw, Cornelius. And I always like to say, of all the Vanderbilts, sort of the nicest Vanderbilt, the most human of the Vanderbilts. When his father passes away in 1878, he inherits the property that Gilmore Gardens is on. Again, Gilmore Gardens is not making the type of money to pay the type of prices that Vanderbilt wants. And so Vanderbilt kicks him out. He takes over the property, which is, again, Vanderbilt property, so it's his. And he rebrands the whole thing. He said, we have some of the richest people in the world living right around Madison Square Park. Let's make this sort of a playground for the rich, if you will. And by doing that, he changes the name. He calls it Madison Square Garden to attract the notoriety that the park has citywide for being the home of the affluent. And on May 31st, 1879, he throws a gala ceremony bash, which was presented in the arena where he announces the new name, Madison Square Garden. And thousands of people attend, socially prominent people attend. And so Vanderbilt decides, well, this is going to be a moneymaker. This is going to be great. You see what happens. They wall up the area. So now it's not just the train shed. It's been sort of architecturally redesigned to be more of a stadium/arena, which you could still tent over if you want to. And there's that old Castelline structure that used to be part of the New York and Harlem. And here's another angle, corner view of Madison Square Garden, now with the name prominently painted on the side. But even Vanderbilt is having the same problem Barnum did and Gilmore did, which was this place was not paying its bills, and mainly because it was so highly seasonable. So the way he tries to make money, and he actually does a pretty good job, is in 1882, he signs a contract with John L. Sullivan. And I'll talk, you're going to get his picture in a minute, but I love this photo. This photo it's very ethereal, just the way that it's composed, the color of it, and it doesn't look like New York. It almost looks like we're in, I don't know, New Orleans, or even, a European city. We always forget how low New York was in the 1800s before skyscrapers. And this is just a really great corner shot. And there's Madison Square Garden. Just waxing there for a minute. Sorry. But, here's John L. Sullivan. So this was the guy who made Vanderbilt's Madison Square Garden a ton of money because he was an international boxing star. So boxing, again, is really how the early Madison Square Gardens are going to make quite a bit of money. And John Sullivan was a kid from Boston who was one of the best fighters in the world. He would go all over the planet and basically beat the crap out of guys with his naked fists. This was before gloves. And then when the laws are passed that boxers, internationally, by the way, had to wear gloves, he puts on gloves and continues to beat the crap out of guys. And he's really good at it. And he has a huge reputation. And it was a real feather in Vanderbilt's cap to get Sullivan to do a series of matches at Madison Square Garden. And this really brings in the bucks. Thousands of people will attend, 10,000 paying customers per fight. And he had multiple fights. So this was a good deal. In 1882, Barnum comes back to the place that he had abandoned a couple of years before with one of his greatest sort of acts or natural huckster events, but he was the real deal. This was the giant African elephant, Jumbo. And I think if anybody knows anything about Barnum, there are two things about Barnum everybody sort of associates with him. It's Tom Thumb, the little person who was reported to be the smallest person on the planet, and then Jumbo, which was reported to be the biggest elephant on the planet. And Jumbo was in the London Royal Zoo, taken from Africa, and he somehow convinces the London Royal Zoo to sell Jumbo to him for $10,000, which was obviously a lot of money. And Londoners and the UK were infuriated by this. They petitioned directly to Queen Victoria and said, you can't let this, huckster American do this. He can't take our elephant, but he does. And then he spends $30,000 to get Jumbo from London to New York, where he debuts him at Madison Square Garden, at Vanderbilt's Madison Square Garden, not his. And Jumbo is a huge hit. So much so that Jumbo is the reason why we use the word jumbo. Jumbo as something large like Jumbo Jet or Jumbo Building because of this elephant. And also Dumbo, obviously. Dumbo comes as a play on words from Jumbo. Jumbo will have a very tragic end, unfortunately. He will be hit by a train under Barnum's care while he's being toured around the country, and he will die, and he'll do a lot of damage to the train too. And his skeleton is at the Natural History Museum. But one of his most memorable feats is he was marched over the Brooklyn Bridge about year and a half after his debut at Madison Square Garden. the Brooklyn Bridge Company, because people are still very skittish about crossing the bridge, want proof that the bridge is strong. So P.T. Barnum, in a way to also advertise himself and Jumbo, marches Jumbo and 21 other elephants over the bridge. And that was a very big event. That would have been something I kind of would have loved to have seen. So Vanderbilt is just about making his version of Madison Square Garden make money when it's written in Harper's Weekly right before his death that the garden is, quote, patched up, grimy, drafty, and a combustible old shell. Also, quote, has been marked these many years as a place for some building of public entertainment much finer than the present structure, meaning the structure is garbage, but the entertainments are finally on par with the people who live in the area and, you know, of New York spectacles. So guess what? The building needs to change. Now, Vanderbilt will die, and a new consortium of some of New York's richest men will come together to build the second Madison Square Garden. This is going to include P.T. Barnum himself, J.P. Morgan, and Andrew Carnegie, just to list some of the men who give their money to a youngish Stanford White at the time, who convinces them that he's going to build this entertainment palace. And Stanford White is very much a part of this building. He will build his home into this building. His fate is tied to this building, obviously, which don't worry, we will talk about, although it is a fairly famous story. And what he creates is the most structurally elegant and, you know, most lost New York structure at the time, or most sort of sought after lost New York structure. And there he is. He always had a very large, bushy, almost like paintbrush mustache. And of course, after his death, we find out that Stanford White was probably not the nicest person in the world and definitely had some very aggressive sexual proclivities, which will change the whole tenor of how he's viewed, especially right after his death, which we'll talk about. But he was obviously a gifted architect, and what he gave Madison Square Park and Madison Square Garden was this Moorish sort of temple to entertainment with those smaller minaret-like towers. And then, of course, that 32-story center tower, which was a last-minute addition. And what I love about this is the original budget that was proposed for this building was $75,000. And J.P. Morgan and Stanford White both went to the board of, you know, this rich man board and said, that ain't gonna cut it. So they increased the budget to $450,000. That didn't cut it either, mainly because Stanford White was adding more and more and more embellishments, again, knowing that he's going to make this not only his showpiece piece of architecture in New York City, but also his home. His idea was this was going to be one of, if not the iconic structures in New York at the time. And the budget skyrockets to $3 million after its completion. And that's not now money, that's then money. Now money, that's almost $88 to $89 million. So it definitely went over budget, if you could imagine. And also amazingly built in 11 months. We talk about the Empire State Building being built quickly, a lot of buildings in modern times built very quickly, but 11 months to create this building, I'm still sort of flabbergasted at. And this is just, I love this photo because it's a street view, and you can see even from the street, even as taller buildings, this is later on in the life of Madison Square Garden before its demolition, it still holds itself as an architectural unique treasure on the street. And mainly it's because of those colonnades and those towers. And the next picture, when I found it in the New York Public Library archives, I was giddy like a little girl, because here's a colonnade, and I think this is on 26th Street, but I'm not exactly sure. And of course, this building was built in 1890. Who had been in America for about 8 years at this point and had already become a favorite of McKim, Mead, and White? somebody can put it in the chat if you want to finish my sentence. It's Guastavino. For those of you who know me well, and I know there are a bunch of you here on this talk today, you know how much I love me some Guastavino. And you can see those Guastavino vaults under the Madison Square Garden colonnade. Really, really awesome. And I would just give a minute to go back and see them and take a couple pictures of them. But there they are. And this was the entrance. And of course, it's funny, the marquee entrance, there was no marquee per se, but that awning, not exactly terribly impressive. And that's the thing about this building, which I think is dichotomous to the sort of far away view. This thing really dominates the whole skyline of Madison Square Park. But when you get closer, the spaces are actually kind of small inside. And you could see here, the picture on the left is of the ticket area, and then stairs leading from the entryway up to the different venue areas. The venue areas were big, but they were not the biggest. And actually, the arena area on the top of the building, not the roof garden, which is above it, but the arena, which sits on the top floors, was not the largest arena Madison Square Garden had, but the building in total was the largest entertainment complex in the world. And that's important because it's not the sort of performance space itself, it's the entirety of the structure. So it was 200 by 300 feet and permanent seating for 8,000. And that's the space upstairs. Now, there were more spaces. There was a theater or concert hall. So this was considered more of a concert operatic venue, which could seat about 1,200. Now, that's impressive, right? So what they do is they break the spaces up for their individual intentions or their individual uses. And there was also a smaller boxing area, which you could see here, pictured here, which sat much less than the 1,200. And then there was also another sort of concert theater space, which sat 1,500 people. And on the roof, most famously, was the largest roof garden in the city, which could also accommodate thousands of people. So although the building in different spots could accommodate thousands and altogether could accommodate many people, it still, in all of its spaces, didn't have the largest ofs, so to speak. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the tower, but before we do that, I forgot I put some shots here of the space upstairs. And so most of the old shots that we have of Madison Square Garden are either of the outside or of this space, which was the more hippodrome arena space. This is the beginning of the circus. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus will debut here in 1916, the entity we still know today as the circus. And this is the three-ring circus getting set up. This is actually the three-ring circus going down. They were cleaning up from the circus. I'm not sure if it was the same circus pictured here. Probably. And as you could see, skylight. Stanford White loved the light. He loved to diffuse light through structures, as we know from Penn. And I love this shot. The very first car show in the world, 1900. So all of those, this must have been an extreme rarity for people. 1900, horseless carriage, the first car show, obviously the playground of the rich. And the other thing that you might notice more in this picture is this was almost like a dreamlike setting because on all of the trusses and exposed steel supports, there were naked incandescent light bulbs. So it was much like, Luna Park and Coney Island. These things would light up at night and make almost sort of like a dreamy tent-like atmosphere, which you can kind of see here in this demonstration for William J. Bryan when he was running for the Democratic candidate for president in 1900 as well. You could see the throngs of people packed in there and those naked light bulbs sort of trying to shine light down on them. It looks very carnival-esque. But I really want us to focus on the tower because the tower, again, last-minute addition. I really do think that this was Stanford White's very male-driven way of putting his mark on the New York skyline. It was the second tallest structure in New York when it was completed, but that statue, which you can see at the very tippy top, will make it the tallest for a period of time. We are going to talk in depth about the statue in a minute. It's a wonderful, wonderful story that I love. But it is modeled after the Giralda Tower in Spain, which a lot of Beaux-Arts and early 20th century towers are modeled after. I know we've got Roths on the talk. The Roths use them to hide water towers, so to speak. But this tower was really sort of the statement that said this is going to be the biggest entertainment complex, and it's all Stanford White. Now, also the thing I love about this is you could see the spiral staircase leading up there. I love it, right in the top of the tower. And this was a actual photograph of what it looked like when you got to the top of the tower out onto New York. Again, still a very low city. The first tallest structure is still the spire of Trinity Church. Brooklyn Bridge will also, the towers in the Brooklyn Bridge will also surpass that at around this time. So this is where it's sort of the flight to the sky begins. But Stanford White really wanted to get there. But I want to focus on Diana because Diana is a really interesting story. So the first version of Diana, this is the second version that we're looking at, was sculpted by Augustus St. Gaudens. We actually talked about him very briefly in our last Lost New York, and I'll tell you how in a minute. But this, you could see Diana from everywhere, and it caused Madison Square Park to be known as Diana's Little Wooded Park. The original, the first one, was 18 feet and it weighed 1,800 pounds. And actually, let me fast forward to this slide. That is an image of the first Diana statue before it's placed on the tower. And what happened is the minute it's placed on the tower before Madison Square Garden opens, there were a couple of problems. One of which was mounting her on her heel was a problem, so they had to drive the mount right into her foot, which meant she spun in the wind oddly. You know, she's basically a weather vane. And she was very cumbersome, 1,800 pounds flying in the wind. I could only imagine. Also, she's kind of brutish looking. If you see this version of Diana, she's kind of big. Her head's kind of like choppy and carved odd. And even Gaudin and White didn't like it. They said it's too big, it's too gaudy, it doesn't work. So they take her off a couple of years later, and they put her, as you can see in the second photo, on top of the World Columbian Exhibition building in Chicago, where she actually fit more into the size of that building. But that building will burn, as a lot of us know, and half of that Diana will be destroyed. Gaudens comes back, and he does a second, more streamlined, more elegant Diana, which is the one that you're seeing here. Moralists at the time did not love the fact that she was completely nude. The second version was for a while completely nude, and then he sculpts a scarf behind her, which ends up falling off in the wind. So she loses that. There's Gaudin, by the way. Sorry, those were out of order. So there's a photo of Gaudin, and the model, whose name is escaping me at the moment, was also his mistress, who had one of his illegitimate children. But a lot of Gaudin's sculptures of women are this particular woman. She's not Audrey Munson, which I know so many statues are. It's not Audrey Munson. But there she is without her scarf. She looks more light on her feet, obviously. She's not as cumbersome as the first. And she becomes a big iconic symbol of New York, almost on par with the Statue of Liberty, which I found fascinating when I was doing some deep diving into this topic. Because, you know, if you don't know about Madison Square Garden, or even if you do, you don't know about Diana, and you can't imagine that she's almost as popular as Liberty, but she is. And that's why I put that link in the chat. The link in the chat is to an O. Henry story, which is called The Lady Higher Up. And it's a really cute story between, on a quiet summer's night when they could hear each other over the distance, Diana speaking to the Statue of Liberty. Now, this version of Diana was installed in 1893. The Statue of Liberty is debuted in 1886. So they're sort of contemporaries, although Diana looks at the Statue of Liberty as an old lady. Or an older lady who's sort of a little bit more prim and proper than she is. And I'm just going to read an adorable quote from the story. And again, you can skim through if you'd like that O. Henry compendium, and it's called The Lady Higher Up. Mrs. Liberty says to Diana, ye have the best job for a statue in the whole town, Miss Diana. Mrs. Liberty said in an unexpected Irish brogue, which I thought was very interesting, I guess because of the plethora of Irish immigrants, even though you would think Lady Liberty might be French. And then Diana, quote, says, "It must be awfully lonesome down there with so much water around you," she told Lady Liberty. "I don't see how you ever could keep your hair in a curl. And that Mother Hubbard you're wearing went out 10 years ago." So it's almost like she's fighting for female independence here. She's saying, get rid of that awful toga that you're wearing. Get your hair out of those curls. How do you keep them in those curls with all that water around you? And it's really, really a interesting exchange and shows you just how on par Diana was with Lady Liberty at the time. When Madison Square Garden is demolished, she is taken off of the tower and she's stored, and they're trying desperately to find a home for her. Originally, they thought, let's put her in the park, but the park doesn't want her. The park can't find a space for her. So they try to put her down by City Hall. City Hall doesn't want her. They try to put her in the Manhattan Bridge, on one of the anchorages of the Manhattan Bridge. Apparently, they don't want her. They try to give her to Coney Island. I mean, that's sort of like the last-ditch effort. They try to give her to a hotel in Coney Island. Coney Island doesn't want her. Nobody in New York wants her. She's, now she's the old broad that she's kind of, turning down Lady Liberty for. And she gets put in storage for 7 years until finally the Morbo, this is one of the first, Philadelphia takes her. Pennsylvania will have her, and Philadelphia, as it was said by the New York Times, treats her like the goddess that she is. She has a place of, if you've been to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, a place of extreme prominence right in the middle of the, go up the stairs, the center stairs of the building. And there she is. And in 2013, they even gilded her in gold. So she was originally had that copper look to her. They put her in gold. Now we have a miniature of her. I think she's about 8 feet, which is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There was also another miniature, because Gaudens did many of them, that sat in Madison Square Garden the third, and also for a while at Madison Square Garden the fourth as a piece. And interestingly enough, Mayor Lindsay called Mayor Tate of Philadelphia in '67 and said, "Hey, could we have Diana back for our new Madison Square Garden?" Could you imagine, where would she go in Madison Square Garden the fourth? Wouldn't even think. And Mayor Tate said, was his exact quote. He said, quote, "When no one wanted this poor little orphan girl, Philadelphia took her in, gave her a palatial home, and created a beautiful image for her with a worldwide reputation." End quote, period, end of story. In short, stuff it. We're keeping her. And they have. She's still there today. And rightfully so. St. Gaudens also did this fireplace, which was Mrs. Alice Vanderbilt's, which I spoke about on our last Lost New York. A lot of tie over here. Now, of course, probably one of the most famous events to happen at Madison Square Garden, although lots of presidential Democratic nominations, but was the murder of Stanford White, which I will treat quickly as we move on. But this is a photo of performers on the roof deck that would become the roof garden where Stanford White was murdered. This is a photo of the roof garden in high swing. Again, hundreds, if not thousands of people could fit here and drink and eat and see performances. There were mainly cabaret performances here on the roof deck, which is exactly what was going on June 25th, 1906. This is a sketch of all of the different scenes, the midnight, what is it called? Midsummer Night's Dreams on the roof garden. Of course, again, with those naked bulbs all over it, has a very Luna Park in Coney Island feel, very dreamlike. On June 25th in 1906, White, who is living at Madison Square Garden, who reportedly used a room in the tower of Madison Square Garden as a place to lure many of the showgirls who performed at Madison Square Garden into sort of a den of, you could figure it out, was eating dinner with his son, and actually at the request of his son. And his son will feel guilty about this throughout the rest of his life, by the way. When one of his mistresses, who he apparently had not been having an affair with at the time, he had been having an affair with Evelyn Nesbit, who was a very, very popular showgirl, very sexualized, also in film, and very young. We're talking 16 years old, 15, 16 years old. Stanford White sees her in a show at Madison Square Garden, again, brings her into his den, has his way with her. There were also reports afterwards that he drugged her and raped her, although I don't believe they were ever substantiated officially, but that came out later on after his death and the trial of Harry Thaw. Now, Harry Thaw is a Pittsburgh son of a Pittsburgh metal millionaire, also extremely mentally ill. His mother also seemed to be mentally ill. He was coddled by his mother. He was a very disturbing character. Because of his mental problems, he was an alcoholic. He had a cocaine problem, not wound all that tight. So he finds in a letter that was written years before that his wife, who he had basically harassed into marrying him, he saw her in a show and said, "That's going to be my wife." Nesbit needed the money, so she marries him, and finds out that she and White were having an affair. Now, also backstory: Stanford White did not like this guy. He called him a little Pennsylvania pug, and he blocked him from getting into any of like the Metropolitan Club on Fifth Avenue. He was always denied access into these very rich circles in New York, and he blamed White for it. So one night they are about to go to Europe on their honeymoon, basically, and they go to Madison Square Garden to see a show. He sees Stanford White sitting down to have dinner at his table with his son, and he multiple times gets up. He walks over there. He goes back. He gets up. He goes over there. It's a hot night, but he's wearing like a tux and an overcoat. He looks really odd. And then finally he goes over there and shoots him 3 times in the head, basically pulverizes his head. He falls to the ground and he declares, "You ruined my wife." And the exact quote is, I have it here. "I did it because he ruined my wife. He had it coming to him. He took advantage of the girl and then abandoned her." People thought this was part of the show that was just ending. So some people started clapping, and then they stopped and they realized that Stanford White was shot in the face because half of his face was missing. And his son was, screaming and mortified. He is arrested, obviously, and he's treated quite well in jail. As you can see here, he gets to eat, which was catered by Delmonico's every day. He gets champagne every day. He gets to sleep in a brass bed in jail. And then he gets off on he was insane charge, which he gets put away for a while. He gets released. He is a really disturbed human being. He will go on to kidnap a boy. It is reported also sexually abused this boy, where he then again gets pleaded guilty by insanity, because the whole time his mother is paying all of these people off to make sure that he doesn't do any real jail time. He will die an old man in Miami. And also Evelyn Nesbit will go on to be an old, poor woman who will die in 1967 at the age of 82 in a nursing home. And up to his dying day, Thaw said, "If I saw him again, I'd do it again." He basically had no remorse for killing White. He said if White were alive today, he'd kill him again. And Nesbit said at the age of 82, quote, "Stanny White was killed, but my fate was worse. I lived," close quote. And of course, what happened was there were high-profile books written about it. The book Ragtime, which was turned into a movie in the early 80s, and The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing with Joan Collins. And of course, they toned it down a bit. This was a very salacious awful tale of people behaving very badly. And there is just a final shot. This is actually an earlier shot with that Diana is the first Diana at the top of the tower. And again, by 1917, a couple of years after White has gone, Madison Square Garden is bankrupt. It's not making money, and it can't pay its bills. And at the time, its landlord was New York Life Insurance, and they owned the land. And by the early 1920s, they basically were like, you know what? We're done with this. And as you can see at the time of demolition, much like a lot of these Beaux-Arts buildings, when they're not cared for, they're dirty, they're dark, talking a lot about Penn Station, of course, in comparison. And New York Life says, get out. And they begin the demolition process, which you can see here, which started on the roof. And hire Cass Gilbert to design their new headquarters, which they will put on this property, which is still there today. More demolition. They finally they get rid of the entire structure, hollow it out in an attempt to build what I think is obviously a gorgeous addition to New York skyline and Madison Square Park skyline, the New York Life Insurance Tower. And of course, not with the gold roof yet. The gold roof comes later, but there it is today. This is a Park Avenue shot of it. And there is, of course, now the iconic gold roof. So at least the architectural replacement for Madison Square Garden wasn't, you don't have to say improvement, but it was, I would say, a good addition, unlike some other things that replace some other things, which we'll talk about very soon. Madison Square Garden III, 1925 to 1968. Again, I know it's 1:11. We started almost 18 minutes late, so this is going to go over, but the replay will be available if you have to jump off. But I'm going to do the whole thing, and we're over halfway there. So Madison Square Garden III, 1925. There is a gentleman who realizes that Madison Square Garden as an entity can continue to make money in the right setting, and he said it's too far south. It's too much out of the way. Let me move it up to the burgeoning theater district, where land was still pretty cheap. So Madison Square Garden III is, as an entity, moved up on 8th Avenue between 49th and 50th Street, where Thomas W. Lamb will design a very, very plain, boxy structure. And the man who starts it all is this man right here. They called him Tex, but his name was George Rickard, and his nickname was Tex Rickard. That will become very important for a very famous New York sports team in a second. And Tex was a good businessman, and definitely what you would call at that time sort of a huckster visionary. He claimed that he got the funding for Madison Square Garden III from a consortium of 600 millionaires, which he refused to name, so we don't exactly know who. And he, again, Thomas Lamb comes in. I believe he's there's Thomas Lamb, who was designing many of the theaters in the area of the theater district at the time. And he designs almost two boxes, a big arena box in the back, and then a front entryway box in the front for what was a fairly large complex. I think Madison Square Garden III was larger than people think it was. And one of the reasons why we lose it is not because of the size, but because of the building of the structure. From the very beginning, it was plagued with bad sight lines because of the supports that held up the roof. There were very bad seats. Mainly, the higher you went, the more you couldn't see because things were going to be blocking your view of the stage area. Now, interestingly enough, Madison Square Garden always seems to revolve around trains. What was on this property before Madison Square Garden III hits was a train barn or a trolley barn, which was defunct at this point. They get rid of it and build this structure. Probably one of the most famous things about Madison Square Garden III was its marquee. People who have memories of Madison Square Garden remember very well that marquee on 8th Avenue. And we'll get a picture of it in a second, thanks to courtesy of Robin. But the very first event to be held there was a 6-day bike race. So they turned it almost into a velodrome. And that was the 1925. That was the beginning of Madison Square Garden, the second. But what Madison Square Garden, the third, will best be known for is the birthplace of the Rangers. And on cue. It's almost like I did this on purpose. So, interestingly enough, the NHL was already a thing, and Tex was really a boxing guy. So Tex was a boxing promoter, and that's how he made all his money, and that's how he figured out how to get these people together to keep Madison Square Garden going. And he really wanted Madison Square Garden to exist for boxing purposes. But there was an old NHL team, or not old, they were actually fairly new, but they had been playing for a couple of years, called the Americans. And they had red, white, and blue jerseys that they wore. And the NHL moves into Madison Square Garden, and Tex realizes people are really enjoying hockey. So he proposes an expansion team that would be the Garden's own home team. So he sends out a guy from Toronto, and his name was Conn Smythe, who was a big hockey guy in Canada. And he lures him to America, and he says, go out and get me the best young burgeoning hockey talent. We're going to start a team. And because they came from all over the country and all over Canada, they began to call them Tex Rangers, or Texas Rangers, like Texas Rangers. Because of him. And so when they get back, Tex loves it. He goes, we're calling these guys the Rangers. And that's how we get the name for the Rangers. And they debut 1926 to 1927 season, and they are a powerhouse. For their first 3 seasons, they can't be beat. And the Rangers become very popular. The Garden becomes very popular. And it is now the rich are coming back to Madison Square Garden to see evening hockey games. They love it. But one of the most iconic things is that marquee. And that marquee was famous for its abbreviations, which even Madison Square Garden itself is abbreviated on the marquee. They do not write out the word square. But often, and although this picture, most of the words are spelled out on that marquee, very often they would not be. And again, here's Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus performing at Madison Square Garden 3. Another shot, elephants. As Madison Square Garden gets older, it still pretty much holds up its integrity, but more and more people are coming to watch hockey and boxing, and more people, as it's growing older, are complaining about the sight lines and the seats. Also because you could smoke cigars and cigarettes and pipes inside legally. If you sat in the upper tiers, you would basically not see anything because of a cloud or haze of smoke as well. So this was a problem. 2 very famous events that are held that were not sporting events was a boycott Nazi Germany in 1933. As Hitler is rising to power, many New Yorkers are getting together to boycott Nazi Germany and what they are doing. Obviously, many important Jewish people in New York are seeing what's going on over in Germany, a lot of which are directly happening to their families. They are also garnering the support. Al Smith was at this rally. Senator Wagner was at this rally. Fiorello LaGuardia, as a mayoral candidate, is at this rally, all fighting for their support of the Jewish American Congress, which is saying, this is bad news. Conversely, a couple of years later, there is a pro-Nazi American Nazi rally. I know, kind of flabbergasting, in 1939, who called Franklin D. Roosevelt Franklin D. Rosenfeld and called the New Deal the Jew Deal. They felt that, or the founder of the movement, Fritz Kohn, said that basically, there's a Jewish-controlled press which was painting him as a cartoonish villain. And he said, quote, if you ask me what we're actively fighting for under our charter, first, a socially just, white, gentile-ruled United States. Gentile-controlled labor unions free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination. And of course, This rings eerily true even now in some ways to recent political developments in the past. But of course, 20,000 people came out in support for this with this huge, as you can see, banner of George Washington with American flags and patriotism saying, you know, America and the Nazis, we're aligned. Ooh, okay. But this was also the site of many presidential Democratic, mainly Democratic, I believe. I'm not sure about the Republican national conventions as pictured here. And I have a video of Marilyn singing Happy Birthday, but I'll just tell the story when we get there. And if any, I can put the video link in the chat for later since we are late, obviously, on time. And a lot of people know it anyway. But the top area of the front half of Madison Square Garden was a skating rink, which I know Robin, who is on this talk, remembers well. She actually sent me this postcard, and Robin herself skated there. So this, like the other Madison Square Garden, had different areas in which to do things. And then, of course, in 1962, towards the end of the garden's life, there is a gala birthday party for Kennedy. It was also a fundraiser for his campaigns. And Marilyn Monroe is called out to sing Happy Birthday, which is etched in many people's memories, I'm sure, including Jackie O's, probably the worst. But the problem was Marilyn Monroe was really at the end of her line here, very much abusing substances, drinking, because of mental problems, as we all know the Marilyn story. And she's called up on stage by Peter Lawford, who's married to Kennedy's sister, Patricia. He's emceeing the event, and she's not coming on stage, so he's got a riff. So he goes on and rips for a bit, and then all of a sudden she pops up. She, makes her way onto the stage. And of course, a lot of people know this. Peter Lawford says, quote, "Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe." And of course, we understand how prophetic that is because she will be dead in 3 months. And again, I have the video clip, but I can put it in the chat and you can watch it. You can watch it later. The whole thing, Peter Lawford, and up to where she sings Happy Birthday. And of course, when Madison Square Garden, the third, is demolished as it moves down to the Penn Station area, they wanted to build the tallest building in the world on top of it, but the zoning in Hell's Kitchen wouldn't call for it, and there was a big neighborhood zoning fight about it. So it's a parking lot until 1989, when the current structure is put on top, what you're seeing here, the Worldwide Plaza. Still there today. Almost done. The Madison Square Garden Bowl. This was a big surprise for me. I have to say, admittedly, I knew nothing about the Madison Square Garden Bowl before. I knew a lot about the Madison Square Gardens we just talked about before putting this presentation together, and then stumbled upon the fact that there was a Madison Square Garden in Queens from 1932 to 1942. And as you can see, this aerial shot, it was massive. It's at 72,000 people, all outside. And what's interesting about it, if you just look back at this picture, and I think I have it again later, that center square that's radiating light, it's a boxing ring. It was used mainly for boxing and for circuses. And I don't know how the people on the outer edges even thought they were going to see anything. Huge, huge area. So it is now the spot of a used car dealership. The main way to get to it was 48th Street, and it was right outside of the train yards. And you could see where the arrow is pointing. It was that whole footprint today, just south of Northern Boulevard. And this is them breaking ground on it. Take note of the building in the top left corner, because that building is still there today. So many other things popped up after this structure was demolished in 1942 on the site and around it, but that building still a good marker of it today. And of course, this was also a Tex idea. Tex Rickard decided that he wanted to have a large outdoor space for summertime activities to make even more money, mainly boxing and the circus. And here's a shot from, this isn't even as far back as you can go, but open air and not on, a high sloping elevation to look down. It's all very much on level. These were wooden bleachers. They were not seats, so not very comfortable, but boy, could you pack them in. Now, it was mainly known as the Jinx Bowl because every world champion who went to box at the bowl lost. It was also known as the Graveyard of Champions. And again, here's that aerial view again. Absolutely huge. Huge, huge. Most famously, one of its first matches were between Schmeling and Sharkey. Very, very high-profile match, but the one that really lives throughout time and was actually immortalized in the movie Cinderella Man is the fight between James J. Braddock and Max Baer. And Max Baer, nobody expected Max to lose this, and he does to James J. Braddock, and it was a shock. And it was one of the reasons why the Madison Square Garden Bowl got its name, the Graveyard of Champion, or the Jinx Bowl. Really great story we learned from one of our presenters and contributors, Peggy, that there was a tiger that broke loose from Barnum and Bailey train, but Peggy Gavin, by the way. Sorry, I didn't say her last name. That broke loose from a Barnum and Bailey train as they were loading it off to do the circus at the bowl. This is in 1939. His name was Colonel. Colonel escapes, and he sort of runs around the area of Northern Boulevard until he is captured in, again, a trolley depot or trolley shed. My favorite quote, and actually I think Michelle used it yesterday in the post she did about it, was from a milkman or a milk truck driver who said, quote, "Do believe me, I have not been drinking, but I've just seen a tiger." They do get him, and of course they put him back. He didn't do any harm. He was just sort of prowling around, and he makes it back for the circus. And there he is back in his cage. Oh, poor thing. It was also home to something else that was called the midget automobile races. Obviously, automobile races for little people, which were apparently big sellers at the time. And this is a picture of one of those events at the bowl at night. And then in 1941, it is abandoned. And by 1942, you could see all the weeds and the grass growing in the areas with the bleachers. It is dismantled to make way for a Army mail depot. And all of the metal that was used to construct it is repurposed into bullets and other materials because of the war. And it's gone. There's no trace of it today. You see that building again where the arrow is pointing at the top of the screen. It's the only way that we can wayfare to find our way back to the bowl. There was this sort of makeshift monument to the bowl carved in the corner of Dwyer Square, right across the street from 48th and Northern Boulevard. But in the past 2 years, that corner was paved over to make it safe and more ADA accessible. So even that is gone. That picture's from 2018. There's the building that was scaffolded, which is being, I guess, resurfaced. And that's the building that I showed you with the arrow. And the space is now a combination of things. It's a used car dealership. There are a couple of stores on it. There's a giant parking lot on it. That guitar center, all of which fit on the footprint of the old Madison Square Garden Bowl. Major World. You could just hear the commercial for Major World. And lastly, the current Madison Square Garden. 1967 to probably forever. And of course, we all know where Madison Square Garden is, but if you don't, between 33rd and 31st Streets on the site of the former Pennsylvania Station. Again, for those of you who know me well, don't worry. We're not going to go into any major Penn demolition talk. There's plenty of that I've done before, both in the archives and in person. But This structure was built to be more impressive than the Madison Square Garden III, but also to get rid of those ghastly, awful sight lines that were going on in the prior Madison Square Garden. And that actually forces the designer Charles Luckman, who is an LA-based architect and designer, to design a quite incredible roof. Madison Square Garden's roof is quite incredible. And as you can see, this was a very early rendering of the levels of Madison Square Garden, including a bowling alley, by the way. And then the Forum, which so many people know, a lot of people graduated down in the Forum, which is now called the Madison Square Garden Theater, which has absolutely awful acoustics, unlike upstairs, which has very good acoustics. And there's Charles Luckman on the cover of Time. Charles Luckman was responsible for Madison Square Garden to Penn Plaza and the Penn Station that was reformulated underneath Madison Square Garden. So most people don't love what Charles Luckman did at that site, but he is most famously known as one of the principal designers of the theme building at LAX, that sort of saucer-like landing structure that is so well associated with LAX. Thought I'd throw that in there. And of course, as the story goes, the Pennsylvania Railroad was bankrupt. They were selling their air rights to recoup the losses that they had experienced post-World War II. The Madison Square Garden Corporation, now much divorced from Tex Ricker, making a lot of money, mainly off of still boxing and hockey, wanted to improve their arena and make it more like a modern arena, with the ability to have ice right under basketball courts, right under stages, and they did it. They got what they wanted. And as you can see here, this is a Norman McGrath photo showing sort of the beginnings of the superstructure through the old Penn 7th Avenue facade. And there is the superstructure basically completed. And again, you see that roof. Very impressive. It was the world's largest and first inverted roof. This is actually a Norman McGrath from 1968, right as the garden was opening. One of the things I have to keep reminding myself when I do Penn tours or talk about the garden is now just this year the same age Penn Station was when it was demolished. So the garden will live longer than the structure that it famously replaced. And here's a shot of one of the first basketball games in the garden in 1968. So again, you see that roof. That roof was very, very sought after. People came in to see it. That roof still today makes Madison Square Garden one of A-list musicians and performers. They love to perform at the garden because the acoustics in the garden are great. That roof it's sort of perforated metal with sound absorbing insulation inside of it, which makes this very large room not need supports so that there are no bad sight lines, allegedly. Although I did see a couple of concerts in my youth in the nosebleeds, and I could see pretty well. And there's a close-up of the roof, and there it is lit up at night. Usually, obviously, the Knicks are playing because those are the colors that are being shown. And in the end, I said in the beginning, we had a picture of the New York and Harlem. In the end, I have a picture of Amtrak. Full circle. You know me, I love to do loops for those of you who know me. In 2013, when Madison Square Garden's operating permit was limited for 10 years, architects and urban planners and historians went nuts visualizing what a MSG-less Penn Station could look like. And as you could see, here was one of the more fanciful science fiction renderings of what you would replace Madison Square Garden with. Here was another rendering. Again, people sort of people love Penn and Penn's history, couldn't wait to think of a world without Madison Square Garden on top of it. I don't think that's a world we'll be living in. But the most fanciful of designs that came out in 2016 was for this, the Halo, which was going to be the world's tallest free fall ride, which had 11 gondolas that would go up 1,200 feet and just drop. Now that sounds like a way to lose your lunch or your innards. And it was, I remember it was announced in 2016 as almost as if it was a done deal, but it's not, and it's not happening. But it was definitely a fanciful idea. Talk about looking like you're landing on top of something. And I believe my this obviously one of the ways that MSG was thoughtfully repurposed was by Vishon Chakrabarti, who said, you know, if Madison Square Garden as an arena has to vacate the premises, why not use the superstructure to turn it into something very reminiscent of the New York pavilion out in Flushing Meadow, which is sort of glass it over, turn that roof into almost like a suspension roof designed like the pavilion out in Flushing, put a giant map over it, and really open up Penn, but keep the garden feel to it. Because of course now, you know, people have very great memories associated with the garden. Like I said, it's just as old as Penn was. So it's very much a part of people's vernacular. And here's a shot looking out at the post office. Again, most likely, although this has been supported by many, this will most likely not be reality. These were the latest renderings that Cuomo's office put out just weeks ago of how a new renovated Penn will sort of fit in and around the garden. And as you notice, I'm sure a lot of you here have been to my coalition meeting to save the buildings around Penn. You'll notice that they are gone in these renderings and replaced by those super tall towers. But Madison Square Garden will officially be the oldest building in the area if this comes to pass. And there it is. Like I said, I didn't think they could do it, but they made Penn Station more confusing than it is now in these renderings. We're not going to go into it, don't worry. And again, I'm not even sure what this is off the back of Madison Square Garden. It looks like a giant awning, much like Barclays, to give you the same amount of entry space that there is there today. It's very weird. The angles are odd. But I do look forward to a future. Morbo, this is for you. I hope you're still here. Where 1,000 years hence, we have Madison Cube Garden, which is from Robert Morbeck and I share a love of Matt Groening's Futurama, which is no longer on the air, which takes place in the New York of the 3000s. And Madison Square Garden is humorously replaced with Madison Cube Garden. And I just leave you with just this one little end of the story about Diana. So in I think it was 2018, the president of the Madison Square Garden Corporation asked the president of the Philadelphia Museum if they could borrow Diana to come back for a little while, much like Lindsay did. And she said, you know what? We don't want to risk her getting damaged on the way over. She's much too fragile. And besides, Philadelphia loves her. But she said in closing, you New Yorkers never give up, do you? And of course, Madison Square Garden, it never gives up. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. And again, apologies for those awful technical problems in the beginning. Let me find the chat to see if there are questions. If you are still with me. Yes, Worth Street. Pete, you took the words out of my mouth. Worth Street was named after that General Worth who has the statue in Madison Square Park, correct? And of course, for those of you who've been on the subway virtual or in-person talk, you know that we see the abandoned Worth Street station on that tour. Kathy, oh, you know, good question, Kathy. They started offering regional service when they converted to steam. So there was no horse-drawn service to Albany by the Harlem in New York at the time. When it was horse-drawn, basically it got you to Harlem and a little bit further into Westchester, what is today the Bronx. But it wasn't until the 1850s when they converted to steam, they went greater distances and got to Albany. At that point, the trip was probably a couple of hours, a little bit slower than it would be today. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to go over to the chat. Yes. Sorry, I tried to make the difference when I said the insiders in the beginning. We are now at a virtual rate of $10 for virtual only, and now $15 for in-person and virtual. One of the things I neglected to mention is that, especially with Madison Square Park, I'm going to start doing probably in the fall. Well, no, actually starting in August, monthly walks, in-person walks with the insiders. So in person, that's how I'm going to get my creative tour juices going, since our tour department has our standard fare. And I'm going to try to film those for the virtual members as well. As Pete knows. Yeah, it looks like a White Castle hamburger place. That's very true. I thank you all. Okay, I saw the circus and the Rangers there when I was a kid. Yes, many people remember that. I know, Madison Square Garden Bowl, Pete. That was, I got excited. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I just was like, whoa, wait a minute. What? Great. Well, again, thank you all very much for bearing with the problems in the beginning. You know, technology, it usually works, but it's never guaranteed. I'm glad it all worked out and that you guys were able to join me. Our next Lost New York is going to be the Lost Amusement Parks of New York. And that will be in July. It's already on the Insider calendar and the upcoming virtual tours events calendar. The date, I want to say sometime in mid-July, but don't quote me on it. You'll get communications from us, and that will be our next Lost New York, and that's going to be super fun too. A, because it's July, and that's the time to be at amusement parks, and B, New York has so many great Lost amusement parks. It's not just Coney Island. There's so many others, including a trip to Palisades Park, which was one of my parents' favorites. So have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much. Yes, Freedom Land Morbo will be a part of it. We will talk about Freedom Land for sure. I know people have memories of Freedom Land in the Bronx. It was sort of the Bronx's Disney World at the time. But thank you guys all again for joining me. And as I said, this presentation will be made available very soon, and it will be in the archives for the insiders. Thank you very much, and have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. Goodbye.